Welcome to HyberNation, a sleep story podcast where serene storytelling helps usher you in to a night of restful, deep sleep. I'm your host, Sean, and it's my pleasure to guide you on another tranquil journey to the land of dreams. If you're enjoying the stories here, a great way to support the podcast would be to leave a positive review. And of course, follow HyberNation on social media. Tonight's story is called Life of a Squirrel, a tender tale that transports you into the leafy realm of Rosie, a delightful young squirrel, embarking on a milestone of her youth, her first lesson in jumping and climbing. As you nestle into your own cozy space, you'll find calm and curiosity intertwining like the branches Rosie contemplates with apprehension. In the soft, encouraging voice of Rosie's mother, you'll sense the warm patience that only family can offer. But this story also introduces you to an unexpected friendliness within the forest, a kind human named Harmony. This special encounter explores the enchanting moments where the lives of humans and animals gently touch, fostering a bond that celebrates the kindness shared between all living creatures. As you nestle down, allow yourself to be spirited away to Rosie's vibrant canopy world, a tale that will not only capture your imagination with its vivid imagery, but will also help you drift into a peaceful sleep, knowing that even the tiniest creatures have lessons to learn and stories to tell. Before we meet Rosie and Harmony and Rosie's family of squirrels, let's take a moment to settle in and fully relax. Find a comfortable position, allowing your body to be supported by the softness beneath you. Notice the slow, natural rhythm of your breathing. And with each exhale, feel a deeper sense of relaxation, as if each breath were a soft, warm wave, washing away all the tension from your body and mind. If thoughts or concerns begin to surface, acknowledge them with kindness and just let them drift away like clouds dissolving in a vast, clear sky. Allow yourself to sink deeper into the embrace of your bed. Let the peace of the moment wrap around you, knowing that there is nothing you need to do in this moment except relax. All is well in this moment. And in this moment, you are exactly where you need to be. Even if you aren't tired right now, you can close your eyes and let my voice take you away to the magical treetops of a tranquil pine forest, where you'll now meet Rosie the squirrel in Life of a Squirrel. It was a perfect June morning, not a breath stirring, and the sun fairly baking down till the whole air was full of the hot, resinous scent of pine needles. But as warm as it was, Rosie the squirrel was shivering as she lay out on the tip of a larch bough and looked down. She was not giddy. A squirrel never is. But that next bough below her, where her mother was sitting, seemed very far away. And Rosie could not help thinking what a tremendous fall it would be to the ground, supposing she happened to miss her landing place. It is Rosie's first jumping and climbing lesson. Even squirrels have to learn to climb, just as birds have to be taught by their parents to fly. Rosie's mother called her by her name, sitting up straight and looking at her encouragingly with her pretty black eyes. But still, she hesitates, crouching low on her branch and clinging tight to it with all 4 sets of small, sharp claws. Mother grew a trifle impatient and called to Rosie's brother Wilford to take her place. This was too much for her. She took her courage in both forepaws, set her teeth, and launched herself desperately into the air. Rosie came down flat on her little white stomach. But as at this time she weighs rather less than 4 ounces, and the bough below was soft and springy, she did not knock the wind out of herself, as one of us humans surely would have done if we had fallen in the same way. Mother gave a little snort. She did not approve of Rosie's methods and told her she should spread her legs wider and make more use of her tail. Then she turned and gave a low call to Wilford to follow. Even at this early age, they are barely a month old, Wilford was heavier and more of a slower-going squirrel than Rosie. But he already showed that bulldog courage, which was so strong a trait all throughout his life. He crawled deliberately to the very end of the branch, then simply let go and tumbled all in a heap right on top of them. It was extremely lucky for him that Mother was as quick as she was. She made a rapid bound forward and caught her blundering son by the loose skin at the back of his neck, just in time to save him from going headlong to the ground, quite 50 feet below. She panted as she lifted him to a place of safety with a little shake. Wilford looked a trifle sulky, and Mother Squirrel gave him an affectionate pat to soothe him down. Then she told them to follow her back along the branch, and she would show them how to climb up the trunk and home again. She sent Rosie first. Rosie had hardly reached the trunk end of the bough when she heard Mother utter a cry, which she had never heard her give before. It was a low, sharp call. Oddly enough, Rosie seemed to know exactly what it meant. At once, Rosie lay flat upon the bough. It was thick enough to hide her small body, and she crouched down, making herself as small as possible. At the same instant, Mother snatched Wilford by the scruff of his neck, and with one splendid leap, sprang right up onto the wide, thick bough on the flat surface of which their home was built. In a few seconds, she came back for Rosie, and before Rosie even knew what was the matter, she too was safe in the nest, alongside Wilford and their little sister, Hazel. Mother gave a low note of warning that none of them should move or make any noise, and you may be sure that they all obeyed, for something in her manner made it known that this was important. Presently, they heard heavy footfalls down below, rustling in the dry pine needles. They sat closer than ever, hardly daring to breathe. The footsteps stopped just below their tree, and a loud, rough voice that made every nerve in Rosie's body quiver shouted at something. From the sound of it, they could tell that the speaker was peering right up between the boughs into their tree, and they knew without the slightest doubt he'd discovered the nest in which they lived. He spoke loud, even for a human, for his companion gave a sharp Shh, as if he was afraid that someone else might overhear and come down upon them. Rosie and her family lay huddled together, hardly daring to breathe. The two tormentors turned away a few paces after a few lower-toned remarks, and Rosie began to think they had gone, when all of a sudden, crash! A great jagged lump of stone came hurtling up within a yard of their home, frightening them all. Mother crouched with them closer than ever into their frail little house of sticks, which was not made to stand the force of stones. Almost immediately, there fell another mass of whizzing stone, even nearer than the first. It shore away a large tassel from the bough just overhead, and this fell right on top of them, frightening Hazel so much that she jumped completely out of the nest. And if Mother had not been after her as quick as lightning, she would have fallen over the edge. Mother saved her, but the mischief was done. The quick eyes of their tormentors below had caught a glimpse of the red fur among the pale green foliage, and they roared out in triumph. Rosie thought that anyone within hearing distance would come rushing to see what was the matter. They then began disputing together, perhaps as to which of them should carry them away. They all lay there nestling under Mother's thick fur. The two boys down below argued for several minutes, and at last, it was decided that the quieter one should do the climbing. Rosie peeped over timidly and saw him throwing off his coat. She drew back to make herself as small as possible. She heard a bough creak, and then there followed a scraping and grinding as his heavy boots clawed the trunk in an effort to reach the first branch. Once on the branch, he came up dreadfully quick. The boughs of the larch were so close together that even such a great clumsy animal, with his hind paws all covered up with leather and iron, could climb it as easily as a ladder. They heard him coughing and making noises as the thick green dust, which always covers an old larch, got into his throat, and the little sharp, dry twigs switched his face. But he kept on steadily, and soon he was only 3 or 4 branches below them, and making the whole top of the tree quiver and shake with his clumsy struggles. But as he got higher, the branches were thinner, and he stopped, evidently not daring to trust his weight to them, and called out something to his companion. All the answer he got was a jeering laugh, and this probably decided for him, because with a growl, he was back at it. The tree really was thin up near the bough, at least for a great giant like this. The trunk itself bent, and the shaking was so tremendous that Rosie began to think that their whole home would be jerked loose from its platform and go tumbling down in ruins with them inside it. Suddenly, the boy's great rough head was pushed up through the branches just below. His cheeks were crimson, and his hair all plastered down on his forehead with perspiration. Rosie stared at him in a sort of horrible fascination. She could not have moved for the life of her, and Wilfred and Hazel obviously felt the same way. But Mother kept her head. She was sitting up straight, with her bright black eyes fairly snapping with confidence and excitement. The boy made a desperate scramble, and up came a large, dirty paw and grasped the very branch on which they lived. This was too much for Mother. Her fur fairly bristled as she made a sudden dash out of the nest by the entrance nearest to the trunk and went straight for that grasping fist. In the next instant, her sharp teeth met deep in his first finger. He gave one yell and let go. All his weight came on his other hand. There was a loud snap, and his large red face disappeared with startling suddenness. For a moment, their tree fell just as it does when a strong gust of wind catches and sways it. Their enemy, luckily for himself, had fallen upon a wide-spreading bough not far below and had caught hold of it, and so saved himself from a tumble right down to the bottom. Rosie heard his companion cry out in a frightened voice. For a moment, there was no reply. And then they heard a torrent of language so upsetting that I am sure no respectable squirrel would have used anything so bad, even when talking to a weasel. The boy who had fallen was dancing about, holding his hand in his mouth and taking it out to show his buddy. Rosie watched him excitedly, hoping that now that he had been hurt, he would go away. But no. Picking himself up, he began again clumsily climbing up towards them. He came more slowly than before, trying each branch carefully before he put his weight on it. Presently, she saw his furious face rising up again through the branches. And now, he had something shiny and sharp, like a long tooth, clutched between his lips. Rosie did not know what a knife was, but she thought it looked particularly unpleasant. There was a nasty shine, too, in his pale blue eyes. Again, his great paw came clutching up their bough. Fortunately, he could not quite reach it. Having broken off the branch just below them, he had nothing to hold on to. However, he was so determined, there was no stopping him. He got his arms and legs around the trunk and began to swarm up. It looked as if nothing could save them now. Mother herself was too frightened of that long, gleaming tooth to try and bite their enemy again. She jumped out of the nest by the entrance on the far side and did her best to persuade Rosie and her siblings to follow her out to the end of the branch where they had been having their jumping lessons. But they were much too frightened to move. They lay shivering in the moss at the bottom of the nest and made themselves as small as they knew how. The boy's head was level with the bough. He was stretching out for a good handhold when suddenly Rosie heard the sharp clatter of a blackbird from the hedge of the border of the thicket, and immediately afterwards, the crash of dry twigs under a heavy boot. They lay very still for a long time, slowly getting over their fright. Suddenly, Mother gave a pleased little squeak and jumped out of the nest. Rosie crawled out too and looked down. Despite the urgency in her heart and hurry in her movement, it took Rosie a second to locate her mother. Invisible against the otherwise familiar canvas, as fast as she was, and so clever and skillful at hiding in plain sight, it took Rosie a second or two to find Mother hurriedly making her way to something, or rather, someone. The ruckus and the noise had not only alerted them, but informed Harmony, the only human Mother allowed anywhere close to any of her children and herself. Harmony knew what was happening, and she was already out the door with her trusted rake in her hand. The rake, though previously something that raised concern in mother and father before, was now, and had been for a long time, a symbol of joy and relief. Harmony used the rake to gather all the crunchiest of leaves and left them in a fluffy pile on the ground right at the spot under the nest of the family, just in case any of them fell. Mother uses it to land on whenever she jumps off the tree. The young squirrels had it below them during the lessons as well. Harmony also used the rake to chase the unwanted guests away from all the nests on the tree, and that is exactly what she did with the troublemaker boys. Rosie saw Mother run up to Harmony, who offered her palm to Mother. As soon as Mother climbed on, Harmony gently raised her hand and placed Mother on her own shoulder and began chasing the boys away from the tree. At first, the boys thought they'd be a match for Harmony and tried to challenge her. They were quickly proven wrong. After having chased them out and away, Harmony yelled something at them. "Don't come back," or something like that, as she always did, because she was protective of and loyal to the ones she loved. Slowly but surely, Rosie's heart started to return from her throat back to its rightful place. As Harmony put Mother back on the bough, Rosie knew what was to follow. Usually, after such events, Harmony goes back inside her own home and comes out with nuts and seeds of the best kind. That is all Rosie could think about as she watched Harmony disappear into her home. Here came Father, running along over the thick brown carpet of pine needles which covered the ground. I know some humans laugh at a squirrel on the ground, but it's not their fault that they look kind of awkward when not in the trees. Even the swan, the most graceful of animals, waddles when he's out of the water. At any rate, even over flat ground, a squirrel can move at a good pace. Father was lopping along with his forepaws very wide apart and stopping now and then to sniff or burrow a little among the pine and larch needles. In one place, he evidently found something good, possibly a nice fat grub, for he stopped, sat up on his hind legs, and holding whatever it was in his forepaws, and began to nibble at it daintily. How handsome he looked sitting there, with his beautiful sharp ears cocked, his splendid brush hoisted straight up, and the rich ruddy fur of his back just touched by a stray gleam of sunshine, contrasting beautifully with the snowy whiteness of his waistcoat. It has always been Rosie's opinion that he was the handsomest squirrel she ever saw, and she hadn't been more pleased in her life than when Mother once told her she thought Rosie was more like him than any of her other children. Mother called again. Father looked up, caught sight of her, gave her a quick flick of his tail, and an answering call. In the next instant, they heard the rattle of his claws on the rough bark. And almost before Rosie could look around, Father had joined them. He was full of good humor, for he had been over to the group of beech trees, and the mast, he told his family, was the finest crop he had seen for years. The family knew they must collect a good store as soon as it got ripe. But he suddenly noticed that Mother was quivering all over. He didn't have time to ask what had upset her before she burst into an account of all the dreadful things that had happened that morning. Then Father looked very grave. "We must go," he said. "This means it's time to build a new house." "This tree has suited us so admirably. I don't think I'd ever seen a weasel near it," Father said. "But we can't do anything today. It's too late." He kept watch over his young squirrels as Mother gathered dinner. The heat of the day was over, but the sun was still warm. A little breeze was talking gently up in the murmurous tops of the trees, causing the shadows to sway and dance in dappled lights on the lower branches. Humans, who never go anywhere without stamping and running and talking loudly, have no idea what the real life of the woods is like. Especially on a fine June afternoon such as this one. Though their larch were a thick clump of trees, from the great height of their nest, they could see right across into the belt of oaks, beeches, and old thorn trees which lay along the slope below, and could even catch a glimpse of the tall hedge and bank, and the sandy turf beyond where the rabbits made their home. One by one, the rabbits lopped silently out of their burrows and began to feed till the closed turf was almost as brown as green. Rosie likes to watch the rabbits, especially when the young ones play, jumping over and over one another, or when some old buck, with a sudden idea that a fox or weasel is on the prowl, whacks the ground with one hind leg, and then all scuttle back into their holes. A pompous old pheasant came strutting down a ride in the young bracken, the sun shining full on his glossy plumage and black barred tail. Presently, his wife followed him, and behind her came a dozen chicks, flitting noiselessly over the ground like so many small brown shadows. A pair of wood pigeons were raising their second brood in a fir tree, not far away from where Rosie lived. And every now and then, with a rapid clatter of wings, one of the old birds came flapping through the aisles of the plantation with food for their two half-fledged young ones. Rosie wondered, by the way, why a wood pigeon is so amazingly careless about its nest building. She never could understand how it is that the young ones do not fall off the rough platform of sticks, which is their poor excuse for a nest. And it must be shockingly cold, and drafty too. Birds are supposed to be ahead of all other nest builders. But even Rosie can tell you, there are many besides the wood pigeon who might take a few pointers in architecture from the squirrels, to say nothing of their distant cousin, the dormouse. A sharp tapping noise right behind Rosie startled her, and there was a big green woodpecker hanging on tight against the trunk of the larch with his strong claws and pounding the bark with his hammer-like beak. Father looked at him with interest. "Ah," he said, "it's about time we did move. The old tree must be getting rotten, or they wouldn't likely be getting a visit from the woodpecker." It was almost pleasant and peaceful as they sat there. Wilford, Hazel, and Rosie, enjoying the gentle swinging in the soft west wind, and waiting for Mother to come home. It was a very fine summer. Rosie had never seen one like it. They had very little rain, and no storms for weeks on end. And the crops of mast and nuts were plentiful. The very next day, after the family's narrow escape from the two boys, Father set to work to make a new house in the fir tree he had spoken of. Luckily for him, there was an old carrion crow's nest handy in the top branches, and he got plenty of sticks out of this for the framework. Mother helped him to gather some moss, nice dry stuff from the roots of a beech, and he made a tidy job of it within 3 days. Of course, he did not build so elaborately as if he had been constructing a winter nest. The squirrels never do. But all the same, he put a good watertight roof over it. In the meantime, Mother had been keeping the young squirrels hard at work with their climbing and jumping lessons. They all got on very well, and the day before they were to move, she actually let Rosie come down to the ground. It was the funniest feeling for her coming down so low. And at first, she could not say that she liked it. There was no spring in the earth, and she did not seem to get a good hold for her claws. The pine needles slipped away when she tried to jump. However, after the first novelty wore off, Rosie enjoyed the new sensation hugely. And her joy was complete when Mother showed her a little fat brown beetle, which she said Rosie might eat. She tried it, and really it might have been a nut. It was so crisp and plump. Wilford and Hazel were sitting on a bough overhead, and as full of envy as they ever could be, because Mother had said that she really could not have had more than one of them at a time down among the dangers of the ground, and that Rosie was the only one quick enough to look after herself if anything happened. Mother was as alert as she always was when on the ground, and then some. It was as if she could see in all directions simultaneously. Rosie wandered, and deeply too, and in doing so, absent-mindedly was about to step into a puddle of mud when Mother alerted her by calling out her name. Rosie felt the ground beneath her buzz like the bee that frequented the neighborhood of their nest. It vibrated, shook almost. Given that she didn't have as much experience when it came to being on the ground, without a thought, Rosie started to give in to her instincts and rushed to climb up the tree and into the nest. That's when another instinct took over. She looked at her mother, who was not only looking at Rosie, but also signaling to her as to invite Rosie to come. It was odd. Mother usually told her children to climb up the tree in such situations. But now, she was telling Rosie to run in the opposite direction. And suddenly, it made sense. Harmony showed up and walked over to the wooden table where she usually shared her bounty of seeds and nuts with Mother. When she stopped, the shaking of the ground did too. Though Mother was in a stance that exuded alertness, it was clear that she wanted Rosie to follow her to Harmony, who was now taking her seat. Rosie made her way to Mother, who was now signaling to Father up in the nest to send down Wilford as well. Hazel was still much too young to be on the ground, and Father needed to stay behind with her. Soon, Mother and Rosie were on their way to Harmony, with Wilford following close behind. Rosie trusted Harmony because Mother trusted her. And that made her wonder if she actually only trusted her mother. Rosie wanted to trust Harmony by herself as well, which is why she asked Mother a few questions. Rosie reminded Mother about the incident with the boys that had happened not long ago, and also how Mother is wary of people herself, and then asked her how she could trust Harmony. Mother's reply was simple. Mother told Rosie she didn't trust Harmony because of all the food she shares with the family, or the leaves, or the rake, though it all certainly helps. Mother told Rosie that the reason she truly trusts Harmony is because she selflessly does all these things for the squirrels and also all the other animals without ever wanting anything in return. Harmony is truly selfless, which is a sign of purity in her heart. Such a heart is always full of love. When they got to the table, Harmony placed seeds and nuts of all different kinds on the table and slowly pushed them toward the family. She did so for Rosie and Wilford, as Mother often ate right out of the palm of Harmony's open hand. She could see the children were young and really wanted both of their trusts, so she was being extra careful. Such a gentle gesture would have gained Rosie's trust, only that Harmony already had it by then, thanks to the scent of the nuts in the air around them, on top of what Mother had said, of course. Rosie and Wilford were inches away from turning it into a contest of who could devour more nuts faster, while Mother enjoyed her share out of Harmony's hand. With her other hand, Harmony poured water into a bowl nearby, which was slightly smaller than their entire nest. Rosie was instantly refreshed. The heat of the day left her immediately with the first sip of cool, crisp, clear water. Rosie was in heaven as she sipped the delicious water. When Rosie looked up from the water dish, she watched as Harmony gently stroked Mother's fur. She felt a little envy as she watched Mother getting this wonderful treatment. Rosie hopped over and rubbed against Harmony's hand and received the first gentle strokes from a human finger ever. Harmony did this, of course, only after Mother's permission. With their bellies full and souls satiated, and enough food with them for Hazel and Father, they were on their way back to the nest. The next day, the family moved into the new quarters in the fir tree. Rosie never liked a fir so well as most other trees. In her opinion, it is so dark and gloomy, and you get so little sun. Her preference had always been for a beech, as an old beech has such delightful nooks and crannies, and often deep holes, sometimes deep and large enough to build a winter home in. Always room for storage of nuts. There was no doubt, however, that the fir which Father had chosen had many points to recommend it. It was an immensely tall tree and thick as a hedge, yet there were no branches close to the ground to tempt mischievous-minded young humans. What was still better, so cunningly had Father chosen his site that it was quite impossible for any two-legged creatures to see them from below. The new nest was found on a large, flat-topped branch, close in to the thick red trunk, and only about 2/3 of the way to the top. Another branch, almost equally thick, formed a roof over the squirrels' little heads, so that they were very snug and comfortable. Father's deep love for stars in the open skies led him to cleverly place a few windows all about their new nest, so that they could easily watch the stars on nights as clear as that one, and feel the breeze carrying the scent of summer wash all over them. With the children in the center, Mother and Father took their places on either side and made a circle around their young, one that was impenetrable by anything that wasn't part of their little family. Everything they could ever need was inside the circle, right there with them and within them. They were all wrapped in the giant blanket. It was the giant blanket that Mother had found for them. Mother made it with the softest of flowers she could find, while Father was busy with the building of the nest itself. Under this blanket, everything was as safe and cozy as the warm summer itself. While counting the stars, one by one, they all slipped into a safe and soft sleep.